Hi, I am here again with another picture book haul from the library. I'm going to start reviewing them now, starting with my least favorite this week, going up to my most favorite. Once again, my videos are unscripted, and I'm a little bit nervous for this week because I have quite a few books that are on the topic of gender this week, and it's a very personal subject for me, a subject that's very dear to my heart that I generally have a lot to say on, and I kind of feel I'm going to try and keep myself brief because I honestly feel like I don't have that much constructive to say about it, about the books, but I'm going to have to maybe hold myself back. We'll see. Basically what I'm saying is I don't know what's about to happen. All right. This first book is called Morris Mole by Dan Yacarino. I've read a few books by him before, the Doug Unplugged, I think is what they were called, books. And I had actually like 3 others with this particular haul this week. But after reading this one, I was like, you know what? I don't know why I got all these extra Dan Yacarino books. Oh, I read Giant Test, too. I actually kind of like that one. It could be Yacarino, too. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing his name. Sorry if I am. I just... they're just a little flat to me, so I actually returned the other ones without reading them, but I read this one, so here I am reviewing it. I honestly don't even remember what I have to say. The pictures of bugs kind of elevate his flat vintage style a little bit, but this is just your typical story about there's a bunch of people, creatures, etc., siblings. One of them's smaller than the others, and the small one has to prove himself. There's a million books like this. It's just one of those subjects that comes up so often that I feel like you're better off just finding like what's the best example of that, and just getting that book and just ignoring all of the rest that are on that same subject. And unfortunately, I can't think of what that example would be, in my opinion, off the top of my head. There's just so many to pick from. I don't know if I have any like that in my collection, possibly because I was already bored of the subject before I started properly collecting books. Anyways, it's got all the typical tropes of the genre. They're all having a problem, and I have an idea, says Morris, but no one heard him. Morris shouted his idea even louder, but still no one heard him. That, etc., because he's so small, and he also has his own way of doing things. He's, you can see his dapper little outfit here compared to his brother's overalls and construction gear. He's not your typical rough and tumble mole. He's a fancy, sophisticated mole, and that's kind of part of the theme too. But it's mostly about him being small and underappreciated as a result. But yes, he has a gentle way of doing things. You see, and so he appreciates the above ground world and all of its sweet bird song and beautiful flowers, and he collects a bunch of food for his siblings, and this is weird. He's about to be eaten by a fox, and then the fox is scared because there's a wolf, and the wolf is like, hey, where's the fox? And the mole is like, I don't know, because he helped the fox hide. I don't know by this logic why the wolf wouldn't just eat the mole, but I guess I'm just thinking about this too realistically. Anyways, and then he surprises his brothers at the feast, he saves the day. And then they all listen to him after that, and even though he's small, he can do things his way. Blah, blah. It's boring. I've just heard that so many times. All right, this one's called I'm Not a Girl by Maddox Lyons and Jessica Verdi, illustrated by Dana Simpson. I feel like every time that I show you these books, I show it at an angle so I can see it, and it makes a glare on the cover so that you can't see it. I apologize for that. I noticed that while editing my other things. Okay, so one of the authors here is Maddox Lyons, who I think it is important to note is a 12-year-old transgender boy, as it is stated back here. As such, I'm going to give this book pretty much the same critique that I have given all of these other books that I have reviewed that are on this basic subject, which is I'm glad that this book exists. I am not in the business of tearing down the message that is being communicated by a 12-year-old transgender child. If a 12-year-old transgender child wants to speak their truth into a book, then I want that to exist, and I want that to be in the world, and I think that that's an inherently good thing. And I also feel that if the book isn't great, it's kind of like, well, does it really need to be great in the sense that other picture books are, in order to be valid to exist. No, I would say not. I would say that if you are a 12-year-old who is putting out a message that is kind of like saying like, hey, like my experience is really different and I just feel like I need to talk about it, and it's I'm sure that writing this book was a cathartic experience for the author, and I'm sure that there are other children who are able to see themselves in this book. It's a book by a child. It's a book by a child that says a message that is relatively unique message, and as such it serves its purpose, and it's a good thing to exist, and I'm happy about that. That doesn't necessarily speak to what the experience is of the reader, however. And so just like I feel like with my other books, I would say that this is a book that I am glad exists, and that I would never really have any interest in criticizing the author for the quality of the book, because it is worth existing on the fact that it was written alone. However, from the experience of a reader, from the experience of somebody who's shopping for these books, I do want to see something else as well. I will never criticize a book like this for existing, but I will continue to ask that somebody out there create yet another book that does this, that does a book like this in a different way. Because so far, all of these books that I've been reviewing, they read really, really the same, and I feel like it stands out even more that is still true even as I read this. Probably, I think the first book that I've read, where it's a transgender boy instead of a transgender girl child as the subject of the book. It still reads almost exactly the same. And the story, I feel like I've heard this same story every time I've read one of these books. And it like those other books, it doesn't really feel that it tells its own story. It isn't a story with, themes about the experiences of a transgender child sort of incorporated into it. It is simply an account of the experience of a transgender child, which I suppose is a story, but it's more of an account than a story. It's got a narrative, but it doesn't have it's not an adventure. You know what I mean? And not all books have to be, and this book doesn't have to be. But after so many books on this particular subject of the experience of being a transgender child are told through a straightforward, realistic, point-by-point account that focuses almost entirely just on gender-specific experiences, rather than, the experience of not life in general, because a lot of these stories do focus on life in general. A lot of these stories do go out of their way to point out, like, hey, here are some, like, point-by-point details of, like, what makes me a person and what makes me more than just my gender identity. But they usually feel like a bulleted list and not like a little adventure, a little story. I think if you want, that I have that book, Ho'onani, I believe is what it was called. Hopefully I'm not misremembering that, that I reviewed a little while ago, that was about a gender nonconforming child, but was also like fully a narrative that would have been interesting regardless of the gender identity of the child. And that had that as a fully incorporated theme, was the gender nonconformity of the child, but it was fully incorporated into an otherwise interesting story, which these books, they just don't do. And I again, like, I still feel like its existence is merited in spite of that, but I want something else that's more interesting as well. Anyways, okay, see, there I am ranting. To get into the specifics of this book and show you some actual content from it, this child hates picture day. You can guess why. Everybody's dressing him up in pretty dresses and telling him that he looks so pretty. He wants to dress up as a pirate for Halloween and not a fairy, but then his mom buys him this, like, pretty frilly pirate dress, and, this person makes the point of saying that, like, this person's a girl in a pirate outfit, and, she's like, I'm a tomboy, I'm a girl who seems like a boy, and this person's like, that's not what I am. I am a boy. You know what I mean? And, that we go into it. Most of this is actually focused on clothing, which is, I guess, interesting. It's all very appearance-based, which, like, again, this is an actual person's experience. I'm not going to say that that's inaccurate. Of course, it's not inaccurate, and of course, that's not invalid at all. But I don't know. It's sort of one note, I guess. Uh, I like this page. There are so many amazing women who have accomplished so many important things. I know girls are really cool. I'm just not one. I like that. But again, it's this first person narrative that kind of just is kind of saying, I am transgender, and here is what that means in a really very straightforward way, in a sort of definitional feeling way, talking about personal experiences, but only as they relate to the nature of the child's gender identity, and telling a narrative, but only as it relates to the like struggle of specific points of contact with gender in society, and then the inevitable resolution where the child is kind of more accepted, and here we have focusing on the swimsuits, Halloween, picture day, swimsuit, all of these kind of clothing-based, the point of contact with gender and society moments, sort of almost in a list form, and then finally coming to the identity and coming out and being accepted and getting the haircut. Another point of contact with gender roles and gender expectations in society. Very, it's very by the numbers. And again, totally valid. Great. I just want to see. I just think that if you're going to get books like this, unfortunately, they are all so similar to each other. All of these books are so similar to each other that I just end up feeling like it's only really particularly worth it to get one. And ultimately, if a book could come out that would represent transgender children and maybe even speak to the specific transgender experience of those children, while also being a story that felt like it was entertaining on other stood on other legs, entertaining on other grounds, and told the story as incorporated into something that felt more like an adventure or a tale, or And I understand these are children writing these stories. A lot of these books are specifically like a child working with their parent to express their story, and in as such, I think it's not surprising that they're fairly straightforward and simple and to the point. But challenge out there to any particular transgender adult writers who feel that they can still connect to their memories of what it was like being a transgender child. If you can write a story that just feels like a story that you would write on any subject, and also expresses in incorporated and compelling and unique ways, particularly unique to you ways, the concepts of transgender childness, or transgenderness in general, while also being a fun story, please do so. We need more of those books. And if one of those books came along, I honestly feel like I would always probably recommend that over these books for somebody who wanted to give a book to a child so that they could see themselves in that book. Because I think that if it had more of a story, it would do a more utilitarian job of connecting to a child and triggering emotions in people who read that book, whether they are transgender or not, which I think is another important thing to do, right? This feels like many of these books, very much like a snapshot, and as such, there's a stillness to it that I feel doesn't engage the reader as much as one could with a book. But, I can't fault the author for writing like that, and I want that book to exist anyways. I want these books to exist anyways. And I do think that it's worth noting that is the first book like this that I've read that was not about a transgender girl, but was about a transgender boy, which needs more representation too. Okay. Sorry, I'm so wordy. This next book, I know I repeated myself so much there. I just, I'm probably not even going to edit that much of it out. I just have to talk, oh boy, and that's not even the only book about transgender children that is in this pile. Anyways, Bluebird by Lindsay Yankee. Let's breeze through these if we can. This book is about First of all, I'll highlight the art style. It's not my personal style, but there's some interesting stuff. You can see a receipt in the background of this. There's sort of, I think maybe they maybe have made their own paper out of recycled materials and then painted on top of that. So there's something to catch the eye or the mind, something interesting about the illustration beyond just being a simple painting. This is about a bluebird. But it's not really about a bluebird. It's called Bluebird, but really this book is about the wind. The bluebird notices that the wind is missing and is worried that she can't fly without the wind. And the rest of the story is her looking for the wind. And it really becomes another book that's sort of like a bulleted list, to be honest. She simply runs around the world looking for the wind in places that you would think to look for the wind. And as such, it comes across as simply a list of things that the wind does, or places to find the wind, or things we associate with the wind. She looks at the dandelion seeds and they aren't blowing. She looks at the kite and it's simply sitting on the bench. She looks at the willow leaves and they are not rustling in the wind, etc., etc., etc. Anyways, on the last page, the wind simply comes back. So there's not too much of an arc. If you wanted a very large book with pretty pictures about what wind is, there you go. Okay, this one is called Minnow and Rose, and it's from a series, Tales of Young Americans series. I have never read anything else from that series. It is an Oregon Trail story, written by Judy Young and illustrated by Bill Farnsworth. I'm going to read you the little opening statement briefly. I'm not going to read the whole thing, it's kind of long. Anyways, I have often driven across the Western Plains, and there's never been a time I didn't think of the days of the Oregon Trail. In writing Minnow and Rose, I not only wanted to show a glimpse of life on the trail, but also the positive relationship that often existed between the pioneers and the Native Americans. So I gather this book was somebody kind of talking about, like, hey, you know, a lot of when we talk about relationships between colonizers and Native Americans, it's usually focuses pretty heavily on the negative. And this book doesn't deny that negativity. It doesn't really talk about it at all. But it clearly is like, hey, you know, it wasn't all bad. There were some moments where these were just people and they were encountering each other and they didn't have the context of war or disease or colonization necessarily on their minds. They were just people encountering each other in the fields of America and having, you know, relationships. Actually, you know, that's not exactly a fair critique. It's not all focused on the positive. I feel like there are very subtle moments of where you can sense the distrust between these groups. So it does acknowledge the tension and the history in there a little bit. When this girl Minnow is her name, when her father is going to greet the people, the white people in the wagon, she asks to come with, and he says, "Father looked sternly at Minnow, but lifted her onto the back of his horse. When we get there, stay on the horse," he commanded. He doesn't want her fraternizing with them, and that's sort of expressed by both sides. So there is some tension expressed. It's not all super positive, but she wanted to focus, I guess, in that sense, on just the, you know, just a part of the reality that isn't all doom and gloom. The part of the reality is just like there was, you know, there was trade that happened. There was Native American people like actively being helpful towards the white people and helping them across, and that relationship was sort of a mutual like experience of encounter and trade, if a little bit distrustful, not actively, you know, murderous in any direct sense. And so she focuses on those kind of those moments in history, a little bit zoomed in, I guess, not zoomed out to see the whole picture and the true horrors that it represents, but zoomed in on maybe more the experience of what it was like to be individuals during that time, rather than, you know, like seeing the whole the clash of nations that was actually happening on a larger scale. So yeah, I guess it doesn't feel like it's focusing on the positive so much as it's taking sort of a neutral stance. The positive message that it has, the positivity that it does focus on, is less about the relationships between Native Americans and colonizers, and more about the positive relationship between two children from different cultures, which I think could apply to any story, and is a valid point that, like, you know, she talks about this, that like children kind of don't have all of the context to be as distrustful as other cultures, as a lot of grown-ups end up unfortunately accruing. and so they kind of, in that sense, they represent hope or whatever, right? And so the children in this story, these two girls, Minnow and Rose, which, by the way, as long as you are trying to show some accurate factual details from history, not that this is a real story that actually happened, but she's clearly drawing upon events that actually happened as the inspiration for the setting of her story. As long as you are going for that, hey, these moments happen too type of realism and focus on realism, I feel that you could have named Minnow, the Native American girl, with her actual her. First of all, maybe actually mention her tribe, maybe actually mention what language she speaks, and then second of all, maybe then give her name from that language. This is very. It either uses the term Indian or Native American. It is not specific. And they have names like Minnow, which is that's an English name. It's an English word as a name. And I feel like especially at this time period, you would perhaps have some, the people would have a name that would represent their actual language, right? So I would have been interested in, as long as you're claiming, basis in history, maybe a little bit more detail in your accuracy there. As such, though, I guess that's not the point of the story, which I would say is a count against the story, that that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is just the relationship between these two girls, and that itself, if that's what I'm critiquing the book on, is not terrible. The girls come across as a somewhat genuine representation of two children having a relationship. They're kind of sweet. It's kind of gay. It's probably not intended to be gay, but it feels that way to me. These two girls who have this instant, obvious fascination with each other, and have all these moments of bonding, and can't stop thinking about each other, and then make gifts out of each other's hair for each other. By the end of the story, they make dolls with each other's hair to give to each other. Anyways, I feel like the merit of this book comes from its narrative style, which switches pretty much page for page back and forth between the two girls' experiences of the exact same events. So every page kind of is then followed by the same page, the same thing happening, the same description of the same moment. It's sort of it moves forward and then skips back to the moment that just happens and tells it again from the perspective of the other girl. So it tells the story twice, but not one and then the other in tandem, back and forth, page by page. I don't know. It's fine. All right. Oh boy. Oh man, I'm flagging. This is too much. Man, I sure hope I cut most of my review of that last one out. I'm going to review these at the same time because I read them at the same time. It's by Ruth Doyle and Aisling Lindsay, who's probably the illustrator. Dreams for Our Daughters, Songs for Our Sons. I mentioned Songs for Our Sons in a previous video and said that I was going to wait until I had both of these books to review them side by side. I thought that I would have some interesting things to say in comparing them. Turns out, not so much. It's not that interesting. It's pretty predictable. I was curious, I guess, to see... when I read Songs for Our Sons, it didn't feel like there was too much that was specifically focusing on the masculine about this story, and so I was interested, okay, this is Songs for Our Sons, which feels fairly gender neutral. You could have said this to girls too, just as well. Then how is Dreams for Our Daughters a separate book? What is different about them? And if I found out, then that would tell me what they considered masculine about this book versus what was left out of this book. Interestingly, some of the pages in these books are word for word the same, and with almost no exceptions, the books are page by page directly comparable. I don't feel like going into a whole analysis of page by page because I don't think you'd be interested in that. I don't think it's interesting. I guess I'll just sum it up by saying that the thing that stands out as masculine about this book is that they harp a lot more than with the daughter's book on the idea that you should be gentle and express your emotions. And they do say that point many different times. Be peaceful, be gentle, be soft and feel your emotions and let your heart be big and express your emotions, and which I get where that's coming from. I get the narrative and the culture about boys that is coming from, and I guess yeah, it's a good message. I think that personally, I don't love separation of the genders in media, and even in these sort of like quote unquote progressive depictions of gender separation or differences between gender, where this isn't really focused on the differences, like any inherent differences between gender, so much as it's focused on the differences in how those genders are treated in society and how we talk to those genders traditionally. Like traditionally, men are not told to express their feelings enough, and men are not told to be gentle enough, and so this book is addressing that as a problem specifically with boys, that they don't feel the need to express to girls because girls are told to express their feelings. That being said, I think in my ideal world, these books would be one book that would express to all children to express their feelings and be gentle, because even though those are things that are traditionally told to girls as well, it's still worth telling to all children. That's why we consider it worth telling to boys, is because it is worth telling to all children. And telling it to girls, again, I don't feel is particularly regressive. I just feel it should be told to all children, which is also how I feel about the messages that make this book stand out from this book. The daughter's book, what it focuses on that the son's book does not as much focus on, is sort of don't let people hold you back kind of a message. Like, don't let people tell you that you are not going to be enough. You can be anything and do anything, which I think is something that, yes, we traditionally do have told to boys more, but that doesn't mean that we should stop telling it to boys. And so I feel like it could have been included in this book, and all the messages in this book or this book could have included in the other book as well, and it would have strengthened it. That's my critique. There is some, kind of what is becoming like traditional progressive messages in here, where it talks about protest in each book. Be a wise warrior, a speaker of truth, a fierce freedom leader, a bold self-believer. Here's this page. This page kind of exists in both of them in some form. Be a barrier breaker, lead your rainbow nation in a wild skydiving multicolored murmuration. Let's see, this book's version of that is weave wise words as weapons, be a barrier-breaking rapper, a champion of change, a fearless truth writer, a tender defender, and non-violent fighter. Knowing we're all the same inside, rejoice in the differences you'll find, be universally kind, and stand hand in hand with the whole human nation in a chain-breaking, life-changing mutual ovation. So it's got these, messages that you kind of would expect from the rest of the narrative of these books of, like, be a little revolutionary, which is a good message in general. I don't know, it feels a little bit trite with these books. It feels a little bit like, I guess to me it doesn't feel as I guess for me, when I hear a revolutionary message, I want it to come with a little bit of cynicism, a little bit of Greta Thunberg-like anger, to really feel like it's real and not just like it's being said to fit the what's being said narrative. It feels a little bit like it's being said because it's what is said, and not necessarily like it's really that felt by the author, because I feel like when that message is genuinely felt, it tends to be a little bit more abrasive. But, that's personal. Not everybody who's a revolutionary is necessarily punk, I guess. The writing in this book is the last thing I'll mention. It is very poetic and I think actually genuinely beautiful. Oyster child, your true beauty shines as it grows. You're the hidden pearl, not the shell the mirror shows. It's a little bit, if you weren't in the mood for like floofy, flowery language, it might be a little bit annoying. But overall, I feel like there are occasional interesting choices of words, and the writing's not bad. So kind of fun. Definitely feels like these books are less books to read to your child in order to impart a message to them, which is clearly how they are presented. It feels more like they are books that are to read to your child in order to repeat to yourself a mantra for you as a parent, to like remind yourself to embody these messages and these ideals while you parent. All right, this book is called The Name I Call Myself, text by Hassan Namir and illustrations by Catherine John. That might be Hassan, actually, not Hassan. It might be Hassan Namir. Um, all right. Meet Ari, a young person who doesn't like to be called by their birth name. Um, okay, so this is an interesting book to me. First of all, it is seems to be expressly about a non-binary person, which is definitely the first of these trans child books that I've read that was about a non-binary person other than Ho'onani, which is kind of feels a little bit different because this is sort of generically, like a contemporary United States non-binary kind of vibe, whereas Ho'onani is more of a traditional, like non-binary gender identity that's associated with Hawaiian culture. Ho'onani is the name of the book, not the identification, not the gender identification, to be clear. The other interesting thing to note here, I think, is that as far as I can tell, the author / illustrators of this book are not themselves transgender. Yeah, I would have thought that maybe one of them uses they pronouns, but they use he and she pronouns respectively. So as far as I can tell, this is a book about a trans child's experience that was not written by a trans person, which is kind of funny because I actually kind of enjoyed it as a reader more than the other books that I've read that were written by trans children and or with assistance from their parents. And like it kind of has a lot of the same problems where it's, again, like I kind of just am a little bit bored of books that focus entirely on just the like gender thing and just on the gender thing without telling too much of a story outside of the gender thing. And theoretically, this book is also hurt additionally by the fact that it doesn't have that, I was mentioning before, like, as long as it's being written by a trans child, I can't fault it, right? This is not written by a trans child, I don't think. And so because of that, it's like, well, okay, so why did you write this book? And I feel like I don't have to say, like, I don't, it doesn't have the defense of like, well, it should exist just by that merit alone. It shouldn't necessarily exist just by that merit alone. I feel like I can critique this more based on whether it is justified to exist based on the writing itself, but the writing's not bad. So what's interesting is that I said it's a book about a trans child, and it is, I am 6, but it actually goes all the way through this child's life to adulthood, each page representing a different year. I am 7, I am 8, it goes year by year. I really wish I could hear where they got this narrative from, because it's not that it's inaccurate, but the book does really focus on the negative parts of the experience. It's kind of just a list of year by year of sort of those, once again, those like points of contact with gender and society that that specifically in this case trigger sort of like suffering and anguish and inner tumultuousness, I guess. That's not the word I was looking for. I'll give you some examples. When I think of the name Edward, I imagine old kings who snore a lot. It is the name my parents gave me, but I call myself something else, so, doesn't like the name. I am 6. I like playing with dolls. They are awesome superheroes. My dad cuts my hair so short. He says, this is what a boy looks like. This will be a theme throughout the book. The child's clashes with the dad. The dad is never really shown. Neither of the parents really are. I am 7. I idolize my mom. I especially love the way she wears lipstick. This is why I want to know, like, where this story came from, because if it comes from personal experience, like, yeah, okay, some of these experiences are ones that I have, in fact, had myself, and I'm sure that all of them are relatable to somebody. That said, if they are not written from experience, then they feel a little bit cliche, and I'm kind of bugged by that. They feel a little bit like, none of them feel super specific to like, oh wow, this must have been written from experience because that's so specific and unique. They all do kind of feel like a bit of the mainstream narrative of like, I definitely could accept if you told me that this was written by somebody who was just looking at transgender people from the outside and pitying us. I would probably believe you because it kind of hits on some of those narratives. I am 8. All my friends are girls. We have sleepovers and watch princess movies. My mom says she wishes she had a girl. Sometimes I wish I were a girl too. That's all very relatable. those are all true statements about me. But, you know, my dad says you're a boy, so you have to act like one. The dad's a real dick, and you never even get to see his face in this book. So the narrative, obviously, it really breezes through since it spends one short page and 2 sentences each on each year of this person's life. So there's not much to grasp onto. It really just kind of feels like, look at this transgender person. How sad their life is. I do pity them so. And that does kind of bug me. The illustrations are not particularly compelling to me. Why do these people not have eyes? And so it's so negative. I hate my voice so much. I'm so embarrassed and scared. I don't have anyone I can talk to. I don't have any real friends. My dad catches me kissing Nick Jonas. It is just a poster, but he yells at me anyway. That actually is kind of a specific experience that I wonder if it's from real life. But, you know, it's all very, very negative. It kind of starts to be a little, like, upsetting. Like, you know, if it's your truth, then speak it. But if it's not your truth, then this is a weird thing to say because you're really harping on how awful it is to be transgender. So I hope you're transgender if you're saying that, because, man, it gets kind of just depressing and dark. And I shave off my body hair. I pretend I have smooth skin like the girls. I feel like I don't belong, like I'm 2 people I don't even know anymore. What does that mean? And look at this symbolic image of the legs being shaved and social media being plastered on those legs, like, oh, all the pressure from social media. So, you know, I don't know. It's a little bit fraught with, like, I just need to know where this is coming from to know whether it's any good. And that probably means that it's not that good, because if it were really good, then I think I wouldn't need to know, right? I wouldn't care. Anyways, I do kind of appreciate on the surface. I find it interesting and unique, a format of telling the story that I haven't seen a million times, that it does like go through the entire spectrum of this person's life. I wish that it maybe focused a little bit more on a story, or maybe a little bit more on details rather than just rushing through it so fast, because it ends up feeling like a big list of stereotypes about how terrible life as a trans person is, which just isn't very fun to read. Anyways, the fact that in the end, by 18, this person ends up being non-binary is kind of an interesting relief at the end of the story, because I definitely thought this was going to be about a trans girl based on everything else. But showing a person going through all of these like struggles with you know, femininity versus masculinity, and then coming out as non-binary in the end, is something that I wish was represented more often, because it's not represented very often. All right, moving on. Okay, 2 more books. Once again, why are these books so... I'm just ranting too much. Jalapeño Bagels by Natasha Wing, illustrated by Robert Casilla. The art style of this book is that kind of, you know, classic realistic-ish drawings that are usually my particular thing. Not particularly into the art style of this book. Just kind of, you know, not too much to say about the style there. It's sort of just drawing from real life. I feel like the reason this is higher on my list, even though I would generally consider this a fairly neutral review, is that I appreciate the concept of it. It's a tight, interesting concept, a story that feels worth telling. It's about a child whose parents work in a bakery, and his dad is Jewish and his mom is Hispanic, Mexican, I think. And so they make both Mexican pastries and Jewish pastries, or baked goods, in their bakery. And he's going to bring a food that represents his culture into school, but he can't decide what to bring, and he's got so many different things to choose from because there's 2 cultures that his family represents, and he ends up, after spending, you know, the whole book page by page kind of talking about each different type of bread from these 2 cultures, ends up deciding to make jalapeno bagels because it represents a little bit of the Mexican side of his family culture and a little bit of the Jewish side of his family culture. It's a combination of both. That's pretty much it. There's not really much to say about this story otherwise. It's got some recipes in the back for chango bars and jalapeno bagels. It has some Spanish and Yiddish vocabulary. So, you know, it's got everything that I told you just now about the story is about what you can get from this story. It's not, it doesn't really expand, or it doesn't really say anything particularly poetic. There's nothing particularly surprising or super unique about this story, but I still found the concept strong enough, and it just kind of delivers its concept very straightforwardly, and so I thought it was a cool book. And you know, I think that if you were a teacher in a classroom with, like multi-cultural, multi-ethnic family, kids with multi-ethnic families in there, especially that particular mix, then it's a good book to have in the classroom to kind of, not just show like a culture, right? But to show like what happens when cultures mix. I thought it was pretty well done. Seemed straightforward and simple. All right, this is my final book for the day. This is my favorite one. He slips into a dreamless sleep, which I don't know. I guess that's not too relevant to the story. Um, time goes by and things change, but not very much, is what it says. So that's kind of the theme: is that he's observing all of the changes and the different objects in his closet world, but it's not very interesting to him. Then the family takes him out of their closet and takes him camping as the light in their lantern, which, like, what? That's not a thing that happens, but okay, for the sake of the story, fine. All right. So this is where the story becomes kind of interesting to me from a writing perspective, is that as the camping lamp, Ray the light bulb, is taken throughout a forest, and he's fascinated by the big, exciting, different, changed world that is so in such stark contrast to his little tiny closet world. And this is my favorite page here. He recognizes the things in the world because he's seen them in the closet. This is his misinterpretation of the big outside wild world from the point of view of somebody who's lived in a closet for most of their life. There's Christmas trees, like he sees in the closet, but they're all over the place, and they're actually just the forest. A very long scarf, something he's seen in the closet, but it's actually a river. A giant vase, but it's like a mountain or a volcano or something. And but everything is bigger, like, everything's big, super big. And this is a good example of, like, the illustration shows a river and the text says it's a long scarf, so you kind of get the connection without it having to spell it out. It's not like he thought the river was a scarf. It just shows the picture and has the text contrast with the picture to communicate the idea. And then of course. And then he doesn't fall into a dreamless sleep because the outside is so interesting. He makes a wish on a shooting star, but they don't tell us what it is. And then the sun rises, but he sees the biggest light bulb in the world. It's I don't really know what the point of this story is, and that's kind of what I like about it. There's no lesson to impart here. It's just a kind of a weird idea, the little like brainstormed feeling idea of, like, hey, what if there was a light bulb and they lived in a closet all the time, and then they went out in the big wild world and misinterpreted all the things in the big wild world as things that they could relate back to their small world in the closet. Wouldn't that be fun? And it is kind of fun, So I enjoyed the book, and the character designs are super charming. That's all I have to say about it, and that's all of my books for the week. Wow, why did I talk so much about these books that I barely had anything to say about? Okay, I'll have to see you guys next week. And, I'll catch you later. Bye!